In this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about the science of human cognition. Cognitive psychologists sometimes use an analogy that the human mind is like a computer. In fact, some aspects of computers are modeled after the human mind. For example, we have short-term and long-term storage in our minds, and we have short-term and long-term storage on computers. In some sense, the answer is, yeah, there are some similarities between computers and the human mind. In humans, we take it in through sensory input, whereas with computers, it's through commands. Some of it gets kept for long-term storage, and some of it gets thrown away. Some of it gets reorganized and used for behavioral outputs. So, yeah, there are some similarities. But there are some major differences. Human mental processes are almost always biased. We have lots of heuristics that basically involve treating information differently depending on what other information we have. Now, we can program computers to do things like take mental shortcuts, but human minds will do that even without any additional programming. We just do shortcuts because shortcuts tend to work most of the time, whereas computers will only take shortcuts if we tell them to. Here's an example of a cognitive heuristic. We're going to do a little exercise here. So I'm going to present to you a description of a person named Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, athletic, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with racial discrimination and injustice and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Given what you know about Linda, which of these two statements is more likely to be true? The first one is Linda is a bank teller. The second is Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Take a minute and decide for yourself which of these statements you think is more likely to be true. The statistically correct statement here of these two choices is the first one. Linda is a bank teller. When we decide that the second statement is more likely to be true, we're committing what's called the conjunction fallacy, which is we're overestimating the probability of two things happening relative to just one of them happening. So the probability of A plus B, in other words, two things happening at the same time, is always going to be less than the probability of just one of them, just A or just B alone. We might think that because Linda was concerned about racial injustice and was also protesting against nuclear weapons, that she was also active in the feminist movement, but we don't have any direct evidence of that. And this is where human minds are different than computers, because we have schematic information that we build to represent ideas, some of them simple, some of them more sophisticated. The presence of some information influences how we process other types of information. This is essentially how heuristics work, and it's how other types of cognitive biases work. Another idea that's relevant in understanding how human minds work is that we are essentialist thinkers. And this means that our beliefs about what we are experiencing shape the experiences themselves. Here's a quote from Paul Bloom, who's a cognitive and developmental psychologist, that illustrates how essentialism works. We don't just respond to things as we see them or feel them or hear them. Rather, our response is conditioned on our beliefs about what they really are, what they came from, what they're made of, what their hidden nature is. For example, you might find a hamburger to be delicious if you believe what you're eating is a hamburger. If what you believe you're eating is a veggie burger, you might have a different impression of it. The placebo effect, a similar idea, involves how our beliefs about a substance we're consuming might have an effect on us in terms of how we feel, especially in terms of things like pain or in terms of energy or happiness, emotional effects, etc. A placebo itself is a sham substance. It's a treatment that has no inherent value. The placebo effect involves an outcome that can't be attributed to the properties of the placebo itself. Therefore, the outcome must be due to a belief about the placebo. Here are examples of other types of heuristics that humans have. One is called the expensive equals better heuristic. This is when we tend to think that more expensive products or services are better or made with higher quality ingredients relative to less expensive ones. So if you are choosing between two types of cleaning products or medicines at your local pharmacy, If one costs more, we tend to assume that the more expensive one is better somehow. And sometimes retailers will call your attention to this fact by displaying on the box that you should compare the ingredients to the other brands to make sure in your mind that they're the same, and therefore be less susceptible to the expensive equals better heuristic. The beautiful equals good heuristic is when we tend to assume that more beautiful people are somehow better in other ways, that they're kinder, that they're more creative or intelligent, that they're more moral. And of course, there's no evidence for that. We don't see any evidence in the research that physical attractiveness correlates with personality or individual differences. Now let's do one more exercise to close out the video here. I want you to follow these instructions, and I'll read them aloud as we go through them. First, start by thinking of any number between 1 and 10. Once you have that number in your mind, multiply it by 9. You should have a 2-digit number now in your mind. So add those 2 digits together. For example, if your number is 36, take 3 plus 6 together and you will get 9. Now take that number that you just added and subtract 5 from that number. And last step is think of the letter in the alphabet that corresponds to this number. So for example, if your number is 1, you'd pick A. If your number is 2, you'd pick B. Now, think of a country that starts with the letter you're thinking of. Now think about the second letter in that country's name. Think of an animal whose name begins with that second letter. Now think of the animal's color. So you should have a country, you should have an animal, and you should have a color of the animal in your mind. Now I'm going to take a wild guess. Were you thinking about a gray elephant from Denmark? If you were, it's because of the availability heuristic. So all of these are examples of how humans use heuristics or mental shortcuts to make judgments and decisions. And all of this shows that even though we use computers in our daily life, we are not computers.